Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange McCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi there, this is Ange McCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance, where our business is the success of your business. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, facilitator, and your host of the Elevate Business podcast. The Elevate Business podcast is a journey of discovery fueled by the curiosity to genuinely understand what makes people tick when it comes to their professional path, choices made, and the personal characteristics that drive performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately success. The Elevate Business podcast is here to promote the enormous contributions of small and medium-sized businesses around the world by exploring the actions that make a workplace successful, the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of an organization, and how we build whole person performance from the ground up. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, growing our learning edges, and honoring our passions with a special guest who has elevated their business, overcome obstacles, and inspires others to do the same. So glad you're here. Hi, and a warm welcome to episode number 17 of the Elevate Business podcast. Both myself, Ange McCabe, and Scott Russ are your hosts. We have the pleasure of introducing you to Nick Quain, a veteran business owner and co-founder of CellWand, where he helped raise millions in capital, close industry deals with North America's largest wireless carriers, and developed a marketing strategy that brought the brand national. He brings that experience in his current role as VP of Venture Development at Invest Ottawa, leading the program development and support for startup, early stage, and scaling companies alike. Nick is a well-recognized member of the Ottawa entrepreneur ecosystem. Welcome, Nick. So glad you're here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to Invest Ottawa?
Yeah, so I was on a pretty lengthy entrepreneurial journey that, they're all unique, hair-raising, journeys that are still only going 2 miles an hour kind of thing. It's like the most exciting 2 mile an hour journey you can have. And did that over around 15 years. So built, a tech company and went through a lot of the sort of standard things that many other founders go through in terms of struggling to pay yourself early, caught up in that early enthusiasm and naivete and then getting a little bit of traction, just enough to keep you going, even though there are signs that maybe you shouldn't. And then raising a little bit of money here and there, issues with shareholders, partners. And then somewhere along the way, all of a sudden you started to build a business with, many people, millions of dollars in revenue and have capital coming in and sort of went through that whole journey. I was really back and forth between Ottawa and Toronto at the time. I always lived in Ottawa or kept a room in Ottawa kind of thing. I'm an Ottawa boy. I didn't want to go as many people pointed out, and was in Toronto quite a bit, but slowly over the years of running that company became a little bit more virtual and was mostly in Ottawa. And then the company the company got to a point where it got quite large. But the growth opportunities had failed. So we had these new products that we were launching and investing a lot in that didn't take off. And then we had our older product that first had success that was incredibly profitable. So we didn't wind the company down. We just ratcheted it down to an operating company that was very profitable for our shareholders. And over the last 8 or 9 years, have been paying our shareholders as it continues to go. But 2 or 3 years into that, I found myself, an entrepreneur with an operating company that isn't growing. I was like, I was getting myself in trouble. I was, going for beers in the middle of the afternoon. And one of my entrepreneurial friends at the time said, listen, you need to go do something else. You need to, and he was on the board at Invest Ottawa, which is, the entrepreneurial hub here in the city. And I'd been part of Invest Ottawa's sort of supported company over many years because I was in the city. So I was familiar with them, and then I went in there just to be, to be an advisor, and then next thing you know, I'm in there, and I saw this really cool building with like 30 or 40 founders in there every day, and saw founders I knew helping each other, sitting down, helping each other, and next thing you know, they're like, "Do you want to run this place?" And they caught me at a weak moment, and next thing you know, I had a job, man. I don't know.
3 years later.
Yeah, 3 years later, I'm like, I had a bunch of friends who were like, "You would invest Ottawa?" No, like they had an over under, and I think I've beaten them all on the over. So, but anyway, it's been lots of fun. So that's how I ended up at IO.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so it sounds like it was almost a journey of growth from an entrepreneurial mindset, in the sense of what I'm hearing is trying to understand your market to begin with, and then developing, using your words, ratcheting it down to something that is specific, that could be operationally sustainable. Is that correct in understanding?
Yeah. And I mean, part of it is, it's a heart. You're building this company to go on a trajectory. You have a vision of turning it into something big and amazing. And then sometimes you're just like, I hope I survive, right? And I get paid. You sort of go up and down as a founder. It's pretty manic in terms of the ups and the downs, like every founder knows. And so it wasn't easy actually to settle for. It took actually some of my shareholders to say, listen, you're spending all of this profits to try and grow and build something. That some of that money's yours, right? Like, we could all be paying, like, that every time, you burn through $100,000 trying to do this, like a big chunk of that's your money. And it was that moment I was like, that's true, isn't it? Right. So, but it was humbling too, to all of a sudden settle and say, okay, so I had got very caught up in, like all founders do, in the new product and vision of what we wanted to do. And it was pushing it forward. It was like, let's go, let's do this. We're going to win. Right. And you're pushing that forward. And then when you realize you're not going to, and that you shut down that we had a mobile app called The Ride that we shut down. That was humbling. But then it took me a little while to appreciate we built this other product that was just sticky. And, it was reliable, and it was loyal customers that just still to this day, it was a service called Pound Taxis. There's still people, tens of thousands of people dialing that every month. And it took me a little while to sort of settle in and go, wow, I built that. And that's like, that's going to outlive me maybe. Like it just keeps on trucking along. So there was that part of it. And then the other part of it is, what do I want to do next? Okay. And so now that I'm all grown up, and, what am I going to be? And I had been I had spent a lot of time helping, volunteering and helping other entrepreneurs. And I think it becomes, anyone who's been at it long enough, it feels good to help others, mostly because it feels like all of those things you failed at, there was a reason, like you can actually take good out of the mistakes that you made, and share it with someone. So I had done some of that and informally, and been part of a professional development group called Tech for well over 10 years. So, I was used to that type of feedback loop of, founders helping founders. So when the idea of Invest Ottawa came up, and getting in there and meeting entrepreneurs and listening to their ideas and helping them, and maybe even making a few bucks while they did it. I didn't like the idea of being accountable, but to someone else, but certainly like the idea of chatting with entrepreneurs. So that's what hooked me.
I can hear that for sure.
And Nick, I think I've heard, we've heard a lot of transition points and, some failures that have come up, and even roadblocks. And I think we'll get into maybe your position in Invest Ottawa as we move forward. I'm curious, how did you kind of approach some of those transition periods or those failures when they were coming up for you? And how did you kind of like overcome them and then keep pushing forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, I think I had an advantage, is that I had a bit of sales experience, right? Mm-hmm. So sales experience trains you that in general, the more times you fail, the more you succeed. It's a batting average, right? Like, so you hear the adage of most shots taken on net, or, whatever metaphor you want to use, right? You want to increase your percentage, but in the end, it's a volume game. So, success is the accumulation of a bunch of small little failures and that kind of thing. So I knew that I wasn't afraid to fail. I wasn't afraid to, when I set out on the journey, it was like, I'm going to give this a year, and this, if nothing else, it'll be an amazing experience that I'm going to learn more in that year, maybe than, and that'll, maybe springboard me into something else beyond what I was doing. So I think that helped. And then also, like, you need some, you need positives coming back along the way, right? So that's what keeps you going, right? So, it wasn't just an endless string of failures. It was, okay, I pitched these 3 wireless carriers. They didn't want it, but this one carrier stepped forward and says, wow, I really like this. And that, that sort of fills your bucket up and gives you the energy to keep going.
Can you talk to us a little bit more with regards to that mindset of motivating self? Because what I hear you're describing, Nick, is that from a sales perspective, instead of looking at it as failure, you're looking at it as numbers. And you kind of put that in its place, or you did, I should say. And then moving forward for you, you really focused on the positives and the motivators. So what is it specifically that motivates you?
Well, I'm pretty goal oriented. So I'll, never had issues, at the beginning of the year, I've always got a sheet of paper somewhere with a list of goals that are professional, personal, health, fun stuff, like boxes I want to tick. So, I'm the kind of person, if I just completed a task that I didn't put on my to-do list, I'll write it on my to-do list and then tick that sucker off, right? Just because of that little bit of dopamine or whatever, just like fires through my veins at that time. So I, so that certainly is part of it, like that setting the goals and sort of going after it and recalibrating those goals when I need to, but also, being pretty resolute and trying to achieve those and not giving up too quickly. I think those were, that was the main one. And I think I think that I'm realistic, but a pretty positive person too. So I think that and that combined with visualization, like visualizing a bit of an end game of what you want to achieve and sort of keeping, and that's a way of sort of boosting yourself sometimes of like, imagining where you're going to be at the end of that month or that quarter or that year or 5 years, right? Depending on where you want to let your mind drift to. I think that can be some positive energy that can keep you going during the tougher times.
And if we were to dive into that a little bit deeper, is that something that like you incorporate in your routine, or is that something you do on an ad hoc basis in terms of kind of like visualizing the end, whether it be the end of the week, month, or 5-year term?
Yeah, it was interesting because I when I started the company, I was driving a lot. So I was driving back and forth between Ottawa and Toronto, and that would be a time where a lot of things would happen. So it was actually, it was a great learning experience because it left me alone with my thoughts and music, to sort of maybe, take me in a certain direction depending on what I wanted to play. But some of it was reflection. You leave a meeting and you got time to think about it and sort of actually put an audio recorder in my car at the time. So I'd come up with these ideas and I couldn't write them down. I was on the 401. So I'd be like, give it, there'd be a bit of that. But then there were times that just the brain candy where you want to put on some good tunes and just visualize a good thing, of where you're going to go. And so there'd be a combination. And that has, and I think that's the hardest part now, is that in this day and age, you don't get a chance to, think enough. All of us have got multiple screens going on at the same time, and we're being, it feels weird to just be doing one thing at a time sometimes. And you don't get those times to have a little bit of clarity in your mind to think on healthy thoughts or productive thoughts.
So I'm curious, how do you create that space then for yourself or even for your team?
Yeah. So, everyone's different, right? So you can't, what works for me isn't going to work for everyone. Like, I'm a morning person, routine person. I'm the first up in my household, usually by hours.
I know what that's like.
Yeah. So, and it's a glorious time. The house is quiet. But I'm alone with my thoughts, and I'm aware of, like, I'm an E, like an extrovert introvert, but I'm a small E. Like, I need, I get energy. I like being around people, but I need to re-energize solo alone with my thoughts. And so my morning is a healthy time for me to sort of set my, have a bit of a routine, think about things. I actually get up and make coffee and make my kids lunches and do everything that's just relatively mindless stuff that often I screw up their lunches because that's a sign that my head's gone somewhere, where I give one kid the wrong thing. Like, why'd you give me? I don't eat cheese on my sandwich. But that's actually, I really know when I screw that up, it's because I'm actually involved in an interesting conversation in my head about something where I've drifted off too much. I've basically, floated outside of my body in some way, and I'm no longer conscious of what kid's getting what. But that routine in the morning before I look at screens or anything is kind of a healthy time for me to think about the day ahead, and probably not long enough, but it's helpful.
You make it sound so fun, in the sense of self-reflection or introspection.
Yeah, it's not always a positive experience. Maybe there's sometimes I purposely smash one of their apples because I'm like, it's that I've gone to a dark spot. And sometimes you're working through a negative situation that you're trying to, that it's not always, but it's not always positive thoughts, but I think that, whatever negative thoughts I'm working through, they were lingering there in the background anyway. So getting a chance to process them I'm in a better place at the end, whether I realize it or not.
100% agree. And so when it comes to learning specifically in stepping into the role of VP at Invest Ottawa, what would you say, like, one of the biggest or maybe top 3 learnings that you brought with you that lends itself as positive to where you're at right now?
Yeah, it was really interesting. What happens when you take an entrepreneur and throw them into a not-for-profit, government-funded economic development agency? I don't know. Let's see. It wasn't the first person. In terms of supporting entrepreneurship, there were others out there who've done it before. So I think that was one of the first things. I met with multiple board members, met with someone who'd been in that position previously, met with a few other people in the ecosystem who'd worked at Invest Ottawa. And it is, it's a different type of any organization that's essentially funded by, it's a combination of 3 different layers of government and corporate funders. You've got all these different stakeholders. It's a complicated place, right? With varying degree of mandates. Like, the teams all have somewhat different mandates in different ways. There's overlap and there's synergy and certain economies that happen there that are great, but it's also different. You got certain teams worried about foreign direct investment, some worried about, entrepreneurship, some are worried about different things. So first off, it was, okay, what am I getting myself into before I make this leap? I think that doing a little, and really asking questions like, well, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Like, what does a typical day look like? What are the 2 or 3 things you hated about working there? What are the things you liked about working there? If you could go back, asking questions like that, just sort of try to get into the mind of, and then, part of it is, the expectations of going in there. I think I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I know I like a lot of the parts of the job, and the parts that I wasn't sure whether I was going to like, I was okay going into it, realizing that, okay, maybe a year from now, I'll look at this, or, whatever it might be. I've never done anything for under a couple of years of my life. So I don't think I was really, I think I was committed to at least a year or more regardless. It would have to be a real disaster, or I would have had to be a disaster to extricate myself from that job if someone didn't do it first. But I think it was this will be a good experience. If nothing else, I'm going to get to work with a bunch of founders. I'm going to get my finger back on the pulse of the local ecosystem more than any other position that I could possibly imagine. And if nothing else, it's going to give me a bird's eye view of what's happening in Ottawa and maybe inspire me in one direction or another. And I knew parts of it were taking me out of my comfort zone. I wasn't going to be the CEO. I had been the CEO, previously, but I had a board and didn't get, had shareholders and didn't, I was accountable. So I knew I could live with that, but didn't know who I'd be working with. And it's obviously a very different place from building a product and having a single purpose goal to sort of grow it versus a more, a different type of mandate where you're helping others with some really indirect measuring sticks of jobs and stuff that aren't maybe directly attributable to the work that you're doing, but that's generally what economic development looks at in terms of success or failure, which feels pretty weird sometimes when you're, I'm more concerned with the 30 or 40 founders that we're supporting and what they think of me than whether we created any jobs or not. But I need to I need to make sure we're creating jobs, or I'm not going to have a job for very long. So, so that was reconciling. That was different.
I can understand that wholeheartedly. And so, what about your team? So, you spoke a little bit with regards to understanding the job itself, but specifically, how do you create an environment for your team members to thrive in?
Yeah, first, as a leader, you first need to sort of know thyself a little bit, right? Like what your sort of leadership style is. And I had, as I mentioned earlier, I'd been a member of tech for, well, now it's been over 15 years, but for a long time. And a big part of that is that self-analysis that you're doing, right? First knowing who you are. And I know I'm not a great manager. Full stop, right? And there's people who work for me who think I'm a pretty good manager, but I'm not. I'm not a natural manager. Mm-hmm. So I'm a good leader and mm-hmm. good on strategy. And I don't think there's anybody that has worked with me who doesn't think I have their back. But I don't naturally wake up every morning thinking about how to make others around me effective, right? Mm-hmm. I wake up every morning thinking about different things. I want to make. I'm thinking about action and strategy and different things and not thinking about whether Michelle or Carolyn or Guido or Paula or Tim have what they need that day to be successful in checking in. So, so for me, I had, through that learning process with my company, had learned that I needed structure in my week, in terms of the one-to-ones that I did and what and realizing it's not all on me to manage people. It's not like I'm not the one who has to mm-hmm. tell them what they need. I can just give them structure to make sure they're asking me what they need or running their priorities by me. And I know with people who are naturally demanding and unfiltered, I work really well with and people who it's a little bit more difficult to extract what they need is a bigger challenge for me because I'm not going to abandon them, but if they can't step forward to ask me what they need, if they're giving me a signal of what they might need, well, that signal better be explicit because I'm not naturally, I might hear something, but I might misinterpret it, or I might just, I'm probably not as likely to dig in there as maybe some other people that I've worked with that are just more natural managers. So, mm-hmm. So I think the self-awareness and, that was a big thing and just starting to build structures around your weaknesses in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
No, I can really appreciate the self-awareness that you've developed over time, Nick, and this idea behind identifying your weaknesses. And, it takes a lot of courage to be like, no, I'm not a good people manager. This is what I'm actually really good at. And then creating the structures or creating the environment to be able to help your team, knowing that that's maybe an area of improvement. And so you mentioned in the sense that, one of the things or one of the challenges that comes up is if somebody's not being explicit with me as to what they need, I might find it challenging in actually being able to help them. So I'm curious, how have you worked with your team, or how have you maybe made them aware of these structures or of these constructs to be able to have everybody kind of on the same page?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I've said to each one of them, I'm not a good manager. And I'm not telling you that to let myself off the hook that you're screwed and it's your problem now. But I am going to say, let's put this structure. Now you understand why I say, let's do these one-to-ones, or I want you to give me your, at each meeting, I want you to let me know what your biggest hurdle is, or what are your top 3 priorities are, because I'm not thinking about those enough naturally. But if we put them on the table every week, I'll absolutely be good at helping you with that. Right. And it's also a way for us to learn about each other because, after going through, 3 months or 6 months of going, that back and forth, they start to understand what's important to me. They understand when, because often it's as simple as I send an email to someone saying, hey, we have to take care of this. Right. Well, what does mm-hmm. that mean? When, how important is it? Is it more important than the other thing you sent me an hour ago? And so they'll bring it forward and say, well, okay, here's a priority list of things to do. So, that one's more important. And, did I say it was important? It is important, but it's not urgent. So no, park that one till January. It's fine. So I think that's part of it. And then I've tried to, try different things. Will do, I did, with all my managers this year, start, stop, continue for me. So it's like, hey, next week, I want you to come to the meeting and tell me what you want me to start doing that I'm not doing. Tell me something to stop doing that I am doing. And then, throw me a bone and tell me something I'm doing well that you want me to keep doing. Right? We'll finish with that one. So I'm not giving you the hairy eyeball when you walk out of the office. So, and that's helpful. And, so I think there's things like that you can do that give them, and that's what I need to do. I need to force them in some ways. Some of them I don't have to do that with, but we go through it anyway, because they're quick to give me feedback at any given juncture. But it was really interesting, and it reinforced to me how important that stuff was, because the feedback I was getting back from my managers was inconsistent in terms of, there's no consistent way they all wanted to be treated.
Right.
Some were like, some wanted me to lean in much more than what I was on average. Others were like, back off. You're in my kitchen. When these happens, I don't need you to, you're CC'd on that email. I don't need you to jump in. I got this, right? I might give me 24 hours, right? To reply before you, and that's cool. Right. So sometimes it's 22 hours in and I'm like, isn't replied, and I would have replied. So I reply and they're like, what? And that's fine. Right. So that's part of the communication. That's just part of the communication. Right. And because I'm not memorized what everyone's little clock is. And so, so that was actually made me feel even better too about it, was because, I still, at that point, one of the reasons I was doing it is I knew they weren't all, it wasn't all perfect, and it never is with your direct reports. And that sort of made me feel better. That's just a reminder they're all different people, and it takes work to figure out how to work with each individual.
I think that's really important, Nick, that you have the self-awareness, and to kind of echo Scott's point earlier, in identifying your strengths and your weaknesses, and then creating strong consistencies for your weaknesses so that you can focus on the strengths. And then secondary to that, really understanding that it's not just about the job, but rather your people behind the jobs. And setting them up for success the best way that you can. And then also being very transparent about that as well. All strong points. So finally for us, Nick, we ask all of our participants, what are 3 words of inspiration that you would want the world to hear?
3 words. Okay. So I would say first one is focus. I think now it's harder than ever to do one thing at a time. Right. Turning off email, putting your phone down at meetings, or even just one task at finishing a task, right. And doing it well and devoting yourself to it is almost becoming a lost art, because we're all got so many things on the go that it's hard to, it's harder than ever to focus. So it takes more discipline than ever, or structure, or whatever it is that you need. Putting a sticky note on your lamp in front of you, whatever, blocking time for focus time, whatever it is. So I think focus is one that would serve everyone well to some degree in their life. The second one would be fun. Have fun in what you do. Ask yourself at the end of every month, are you having fun? And it's okay if you're not, because sometimes your job's not fun, or whatever you're doing isn't fun. But are you in the process? Are you getting through something that's going to end and there's fun on the other side? And if there's not, what actions are you taking to get fun back in your life? Because, and I say fun, that's one word. I use fun, but it can be inspiration, motivation, a lot of words that sort of fall into the same bucket. And certainly when it comes to your career, right? If you're not, it's easy. It's especially easy in this day and age, 8 months into, video lockdown and under house arrest. It's easy to not be having fun. So I think that's an important word to, I have it on sort of my list of things, my having fun and everything that I do. And if I'm not, then I'm, either make it fun or work on a path to get out of it. And then similar, I would say freedom. Right. A lot of people think of if I get here, I'll be free to do this, right? Or if I do this, like freedom is a declaration. Like you can declare freedom unless you're in jail, right? Or whatever, like really not free or house arrest. You're and maybe now when we can't, masks and that kind of thing, we're not feeling as free as we normally are, but for the most part, we are free. You're not like wherever you feel like you're stuck, you're not having fun, you're not motivated in what you're doing. Like, you're free to make the change, and any minute of any day is the first step in a direction that takes you out of whatever rut or wherever you might be stuck in if you're not happy with where you are in your life or in terms of career or whatever it might be. I think that we forget sometimes that we're not stuck, that we do have that personal freedom to take a step in a different direction.
Mm-hmm. Focus, fun, and freedom. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us today and sharing all of your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. And so we really appreciate you sharing your insights with Intuitive Performance and our subscribers, both from the Ottawa Invest perspective and an entrepreneurial flair to it as well. And so for those who would like to learn more about Ottawa Invest, we're going to provide a link to your company on the profile of the Elevate Business Podcast title page. Take good care. Thank you very much for all of our subscribers to tuning in into another great episode of the Elevate Business podcast. Take good care. Thanks for listening to the Elevate Business podcast. I hope you enjoyed the program. You can subscribe to future podcasts at intuitiveperformance.com, where you can also sign up for webinars and learn more about professional coaching and our facilitation solutions available to help fire up your whole person performance skills and drive actions for success. Until next time, stay true to you and take care of each other. We are all better together. Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuitive Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.